Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thanks for taking time and your patience today. My colleague, Representative Everett, mentioned that he thought that the severance tax revenue projections from the governor's office I think he said, overly ambitious. I also feel that they're overly inconsistent, unfortunately, and continually inconsistent. And while the governor's been consistent that he wants a 5% severance tax, I think he's been very consistent on that since last February. But what's inconsistent are those revenue projection and estimates. Last February, he said that he could it would raise $550 million for a 5% severance tax. And then in May, he moved that number to $700 million, keeping the rate at 5%. And then in September, he went to $1 billion with the same 5%. And then last week, he said that I'm proposing a 5% severance tax that is projected to generate more than $1 billion in annual revenues. But you had mentioned this morning that a lot of those revenue estimates are based on a price and a production level. And while the governor has almost doubled his revenue estimates over the last year, the price has fallen by 50%, at least, no matter what index you use. There was a lot of discussion about an index, but if you look from last February to last week, we're looking at sometimes even 1/3 of what they were back in February. So how the governor's doubling his revenue estimates doesn't really make sense to me. But you also mentioned there's a production element to it. You know, if the more gas, the higher the revenue. I think both sides of this debate could say that we think production levels are going up, while the reality is that these companies have reduced their capital expenditures and production may level off or drop. But even so, I don't think we could project a year or two out, and definitely not the price. My question to you is, can you tell the committee what a 5% severance tax on current production levels would generate in year 15-16 for this budget that we're hopefully going to pass in just a few months?
So you're just taking off the volume component from the governor's proposal?
Well, I guess that's fair because the governor has said all along 5%, but then when he rolled this plan out, I think last month, he said 5% plus. So while in his budget address last week, he said 5%, I'm proposing a 5% severance tax. You're right, it's actually 5% plus, which is fairly new to the conversation. So I would just, let's take the governor's words. I'm proposing a 5% severance tax at current production levels in current pricing, what that would generate.
I do not have that figure, but we can make a computation such as that, assuming production holds up at its current level.
Sure, and all of these are an estimate, but I think currently it would be going forward for 3 months purposes, looking at what, even if you said we think that production's going to grow by a certain percent. I think the governor's using $5 trillion, but just last year we were doing between 3 and 4 trillion cubic feet. But if you could just do current production and current pricing at 5% severance tax, what that would generate, because I think that's really what our basis of a revenue estimate should be. But I will say that in December, the Associated Press did a piece that on current production at current prices, which have dropped since then, would generate between $500 and $700 million. And so while the governor, the price has dropped, which you would think that number would also have come down, let's say it's on the top end. Let's say it's the $675 million, which is significantly less. The governor also has stated that he wants to keep the impact fee revenues almost held harmless and driven back. So that wouldn't be used for education. I think he's also stated that DEP and regulatory costs would also be deducted. And he hasn't really unveiled a lot of this, but he keeps talking about this alternative energy plan and putting money to alternative fuels, which would obviously reduce that number as well. So I think what's really important, as I think the gentlelady she was exactly right earlier. She said that our job is to kind of see what is the actual structural deficit by the end of this process and what are reasonable revenue estimates. And I think basing current prices that are completely out of whack in a production that may be unobtainable, and then continuing to say that this is going to bring in $1 billion, I think we've got to have an independent determination of what 5% actually means at current prices, because we haven't gotten that. I will say also the question is, the Associated Press mentioned in this article that the Progressive Research Group was who did a report on the severance tax, and that's what the governor had been using all along. It was what they said Progressive Research Group, but it's named PA Budget and Policy Center. Are you familiar with the PA Budget and Policy Center work or their estimates?
I'm familiar with their work, yes. I haven't looked at their estimates of this specific proposal.
And would you say that they're an unbiased group, or because the Associated Press, who I think we all have respect for, mentioned that there was a progressive research group that the governor was basing this $1 billion revenue estimate on? And I just was curious if you had seen if they were an unbiased group or they were fairly direct about their political views.
Oh, I don't have an opinion one way or the other on their
Okay. All right. I'm going to take the Associated Press at their word and understand your position. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the latitude, and once again, thank you for your patience today.